There is a sheet of parchment, written entirely in Latin, signed by the hand of an old man in a black habit. It is a thank you note. The man who signed it was Gregorio de Amare, abbot of the Monte Cassino, one of the oldest monasteries in the Western world. The men he was thanking wore the uniform of the German army. He handed it to them on the last days of 1943, after a mass in a basilica that stood on its mountain, since before there was an England or a France, before most of the cities of Europe had names. Within 10 weeks, that basilica was gone. Not damaged, gone. The whole summit was beaten into a broken stone by the aircraft of the armies that had come to free Italy. This is the story of an army that emptied a monastery in order to save it, and of another army that flattened the same monastery to take a hill it would not take for another 3 months. It is also the story of the men who climbed that hill. They had been carried to Italy out of the labour camps of the Soviet interior by a war that opened with a secret line drawn across a map of their own country. It begins with the note, and that note begins on the mountain. Monte Cassino is a rock about 80 miles southeast of Rome, with a flat-top peak that looks down on the town of Cassino and the road to the capital. A man named Benedict climbed it around the year 529. He found a shrine to Apollo, still standing at the top, still drawing worshippers from the valley, and he tore it down and built a monastery in its place. On that mountain, Benedict wrote a set of instructions that would order monastic life across the whole of the West for the next 15 centuries. We call it the Rule. It is the reason there are monks in Europe at all in the shape that we recognise. Monte Cassino was the first house of the Benedictine order, the place the whole tradition grew out from. What gathered there over the centuries is hard to take in. By the 20th century, the Abbey held one of the most important monastic libraries in Europe. 800 papal documents, 20,000 volumes in the old library, 60,000 in the new, 500 incunabula, which were books printed in the first decades after the printing press existed, 200 manuscripts written on parchment, some of them older than nearly anything in private hands anywhere. Paintings, tapestries, the kind of inheritance that does not have a price because nothing can be bought to replace it. The mountain had been attacked before. Lombard raiders sacked it around the year 570, Saracens burned it in 883, an earthquake brought much of it down in 1349, French troops looted it in 1799, but each time it was emptied or broken, and each time it was rebuilt and refilled. Monte Cassino had died before, and it had always come back. In 1943, it entered the worst year of its long history. In September 1943, Italy surrendered to the Allies. The Germans, who had been Italy's partner, now treated the whole peninsula as a ground to be held against the armies coming up from the south. Their commander in Italy was Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. He looked at the map and saw what every commander for 2,000 years had seen. The road to Rome ran through a narrow valley below Monte Cassino, and whoever held the high ground held the road. So the Germans built a defensive belt across the waist of Italy called the Gustav line, and they anchored the western end of it on the mountains around Cassino. Kesselring left the Abbey alone. He did not put his soldiers inside it, and in December 1943 he reached an understanding with the Vatican. German troops would stay out of the building itself, a neutral zone was built around it, and military police were posted to keep his own men from crossing the line. The Germans dug their positions into the slopes below the walls, where the rock gave them cover, and they left the monastery standing above them. So the strongest position on the whole line was the one building the defenders had promised not to occupy. It stood above their heads, empty, while they dug into the rock below it. But before the battle, before any of it, 2 German officers drove up the mountain road with an idea no one had asked them for. The 2 men were not generals. One was a lieutenant colonel named Julius Schlegel, an Austrian who ran a maintenance and transport section. The other was a captain named Maximilian Becker, a doctor. They belonged to the Hermann Göring Division, an armoured unit named after the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany. Becker and Schlegel understood something that the abbot did not want to believe. The front was coming straight for the mountain, and when it arrived, the library and its treasures would be standing right in the middle of it. The abbot, Gregorio Diamare, was almost 80. When the officers first proposed crating up the abbey's treasures and driving them away, he thought the idea was close to absurd. Both sides in the war had publicly promised to spare churches and monuments. The place had stood for 1400 years, and to his mind, the danger was unreal. No one would destroy the holiest site in Western monasticism. The officers came back. They were more direct the second time. The hill was too valuable to be left out of the fighting. A battle was certain, and the abbey was going to be inside it. The old man agreed. What followed was, for 3 weeks in the autumn of 1943, one of the strangest operations of the war. German soldiers found timber and built crates. They pulled carpenters out of the ranks. They hired local Italian labourers and paid them in army rations and 20 cigarettes a day. And then they began carrying 14 centuries of European memory down a mountain. It was more than 100 truckloads. Monks rode in the cabs as escorts, all the way to Rome, so that no one could later say that the church had been robbed. The destination was the Vatican and Castel Sant'Angelo, the papal fortress, the safest ground in Italy. The abbey was not the only collection on those trucks. Museums in Naples had already sent their own treasures to Monte Cassino for safekeeping, thinking the monastery would be untouchable, so the convoys were carrying almost half of the art of southern Italy. The work was finished in the first days of November. It had taken 3 weeks, in wartime, in a country that was not their own. When the last trucks had gone, the monks had held a mass in the basilica, and the abbot of Monte Cassino, in gratitude, presented the German officers with formal scrolls of parchment, written out in Latin, in old monastic hand. They named General Paul Conrath, who commanded the division. They named Schlegel and Becker by their Latin titles, and they thanked these men of the German army for rescuing the monks and the treasures of the Abbey of Monte Cassino. A Benedictine abbot in the winter of 1943 had put his name to a written blessing for soldiers of the Third Reich, in Latin on parchment, because they had saved his library. And within 3 months, the men who would destroy that library were not Germans. They were the soldiers coming to set Italy free. Sadly, not everything on those trucks reached the Vatican. The division that supplied the labour and the fuel was the Hermann Göring Division. And Hermann Göring was the most committed art thief of the Nazi state. He had built a private collection by stripping occupied Europe of whatever he wanted. And as the crates moved north, some of them, in particular, cases packed with paintings from the museums of Naples, did not arrive where the monks had been promised they would arrive. Around 15 cases of Neapolitan museum property are believed to have been routed instead to senior German officers, and some of those works went into Göring's own hands. A few were recovered after the war. One was Titian's Danae, lifted from the Naples collection that had been sheltered at the Abbey, which spent the war in Göring's own bedroom and was not handed back to Italy until 1947. Others were never seen again and remain on the list of art still missing from the Second World War. The same convoy carried 2 purposes side by side. 2 men saved a library that the bombs would otherwise have erased. Those trucks also fed a looting operation that took what it pleased on the way past. The scroll thanked the rescue, and it knew nothing of the theft riding in the next crate. Finally, the front reached the mountain. By the start of 1944, the armies had ground their way up the Italian boot and slammed into the Gustav line. They tried to break it at Cassino, and the mountain broke them instead. Attack after attack went up the slopes and came back as casualty lists. By late January, the assaults had already cost 11,000 men. The 2 leading American divisions had lost something close to 80% of their fighting strength, with one general describing the survivors on the line as disheartened and almost mutinous. Every soldier who looked up at the valley saw the same thing. The Abbey, 4 stories of pale stone on the highest point, looking down on every move they made. An American lieutenant named Harold Bond wrote this down years later. Like a lion it crouched, he said, dominating all approaches. Another young officer, Claire Cunningham, put it more simply. It seemed like we were under observation all the time. They had become certain that German artillery spotters were inside the building. The fire coming down on them was too accurate to be anything else. They were wrong, but the shells were coming from the slopes, not the walls. Men were dying out in the open, and to them, the great silent monastery was the only thing that could explain it. The pressure to destroy it started to build from here. A senior commander, the New Zealand Bernard Freiberg, pressed for the Abbey to be bombed. His staff argued that no position should be spared if it was costing lives. Above them, the others agreed. The American general, Mark Clark, who commanded the 5th Army, did not believe the Germans were in the Abbey and did not want it to be touched. It was overruled, and he demanded that the order be put in writing and handed down to him from above, so that the destruction of one of the greatest monuments of the world would never be recorded as his decision. He got his written order, he obeyed it, and he never forgave it. On the 14th of February, Allied aircraft scattered leaflets over the mountain. The notes warned the monks and the hundreds of refugees sheltering inside that the Abbey was about to be attacked and that they should leave at once. There was no truce, there was no safe corridor out, and the people inside were told to flee, with nowhere to flee to. The next morning, the sky was filled with bombers. On the morning of the 15th of February, 1944, wave after wave of American aircraft came over Monte Cassino. More than 140 heavy bombers, the 4-engined B-17s, followed by smaller medium bombers. Between bomb runs, the artillery hammered the summit, and by the end, they had dropped well over 1,000 tons of high explosive into the Abbey and reduced the entire top of the mountain into smoking rubble. Down in the valley, men cheered. After weeks of staring up at this monolith that was killing them, they watched it come apart, and many of them were glad. Clark and his chief of staff simply refused to come and watch it all. Then the bombers went home, and over the days that followed, the truth came out of the rubble slowly. There were no German soldiers in the Abbey. There never had been, and every serious investigation since has confirmed it. The neutral zone that the Germans had reached with the Vatican had held, and the defenders had dug into the slopes outside the walls exactly where they had always been, and the bombs did not touch them at all. The people the bombs killed were the people who had nowhere to go. Around 230 Italian civilians, men, women, and children, who had climbed the mountain believing that the holy place would be safe, died in the ruins. Luckily, the abbot survived. He and a handful of monks had gone down into the deep crypt, the oldest stone part of the building, and it held. With the Abbey intact, the Germans had honoured their promise and stayed out of it. With the Abbey in ruins, the promise no longer meant anything, because there was no longer a building to protect. German paratroopers moved straight into the rubble. The broken walls and cellars made far better cover than a clean 4-story building ever could. The bombing did not drive the Germans off the mountain, it only built them a better fortress and invited them in. The position that had cost so many lives now cost more, and it would not fall for another 3 months. The destruction of the Monte Cassino achieved nothing that its planners had wanted, and it only destroyed lives of people it was never aimed at. On the 17th of February, 2 days after the bombing, the old abbot finally left his monastery for the last time. The man whose home had just been destroyed by the Allies was driven to the headquarters of the army the Allies were fighting. A German officer had already pressed him to sign a statement, and he signed it. I testify that the whole truth is that the German soldiers have never been within the precincts of the holy monastery of Cassino. Of my own free will, I state that there are not now and never have been any German soldiers in the monastery of Monte Cassino. Every word of it was true. That was what made it so useful. On the orders of Joseph Goebbels, the German propaganda master, the abbot was taken to the radio station of the German embassy in Rome and put in front of a microphone to tell the world what had been done to his abbey. The Germans built a film around this. A narrator spoke of the enemy's senseless lust for destruction while Germany struggled to defend the civilization of Europe. The same army that carried the library down the mountain now carried the abbot's grief across the airwaves. In December, he had signed a scroll thanking the German army for saving his treasures, and in February he signed a statement the German army turned into a weapon. Between those two signatures, the people who had come to free him destroyed the thing he had spent his life guarding. Both were written in the hand of the old man who had only ever wanted his mountain to be left alone. When the war was over, and the men who had given the orders sat down to write their memoirs, almost none of them defended it. Mark Clark, who had been forced to carry out an order he opposed, was blunt. He called the bombing a tragic mistake, and he wrote that it was too bad to needlessly destroy one of the art treasures of the world. The Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Mallione, had said it to an American diplomat at the time in plainer language. He called the bombing a colossal blunder and a piece of gross stupidity. The British military thinker, JFC Fuller, called it an act of sheer tactical stupidity. The mountain was still German. That was the part no verdict could soften. The Abbey was gone and the enemy was still on the summit, and the only way left to take it would be the most obvious. Men would have to climb the hill and fight the paratroopers in the ruins, body against body. The soldiers who took Monte Cassino in May 1944 were Polish, and the way they had fought came out of where they had been. These men were not the ordinary recruits. Most of them had begun the war as civilians and soldiers in eastern Poland. In September 1939, their country was carved in two by an agreement between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. A secret protocol that drew a line across the map and handed everything east of it to Stalin. The Germans took the West, and the Soviets took these men's homes. What followed for them was deportation. The Soviet secret police rounded up Polish soldiers, officials, and families and shipped them east by rail into labor camps of the far Soviet interior from Kazakhstan to Siberia, where they worked and starved. Then in 1941, Hitler turned on Stalin, and overnight the Soviet Union needed every ally it could find. The surviving Poles were released from the camps to form an army. Under General Anders, himself just out of Soviet prison, tens of thousands of them walked out of the Soviet Union, through Persia and the Middle East, and into the British armies fighting in the Mediterranean. They had crossed half the world, they had buried their dead behind them in the snow, and now they were being handed a mountain in Italy to take. The night before the assault, Anders spoke to them. His order of the day reminded them exactly who they were and what had been done to them. He named the German attack on Poland and the partition that followed it, and the homes and the families taken from them in the years since, and he told them to let the lion awake in their hearts. The Polish attack opened in the second week of May. It was as bad as anything in the war. The worst of it was an area called Point 593, where the Poles and German paratroopers fought for 3 days at close range, sometimes hand-to-hand, across ground with almost no cover under constant fire. The Corps had lost more than 9,000 men. They went up, were thrown back, and went up again. A patrol of the 12th Podolsky Lancers climbed into the ruins of the Abbey and found them nearly empty. The paratroopers had pulled out in the night. A few wounded Germans were all that was left. The Poles raised a regimental pennant first, and then the red and white flag of Poland over the broken stones, and played the broken trumpet call of Krakow, the tune that sounds every hour from the tower at St. Mary's Church in the old Polish capital. It's a melody that stops partway through, in memory of a medieval trumpeter said to have been killed by an arrow before he could finish the warning. The Poles played it over the ruins of an Italian monastery 1,000 miles from home, most of them would never see again. When the notes carried down to the Polish command post below, men who had crossed Siberia to be there wept where they stood. One of them said it simply, "From being prisoners in Russia, now we have shown the world that we can fight." Sadly, not all of them lived to hear the bugle. The poppies came up red across the churned ground that spring, and the Poles made a song of it that they still sing. Red poppies on Monte Cassino. They wrote that the flowers drank Polish blood instead of dew. For them, it became the song of the whole long road from the camps to the mountain. The road to Rome was finally open. The city fell on the 4th of June, 1944, 2 days before the landings in Normandy pushed it off the front pages of the world. And once again, the Abbey slowly started to return. The treasures came home from the Vatican out of Castel Sant'Angelo, the manuscripts and the paintings that had ridden down the mountain in the German trucks in the autumn of 1943. Most of what Becker and Schlegel had crated up had survived the wars in the vaults of Rome. The building had died, the memory inside it had not, because 2 enemy officers had carried it out before the bombs came. At the end of it all, there is a single object. One codex, one handwritten book, centuries old, back on a shelf in the rebuilt library, on the mountain it had always belonged to. It outlived the walls that had housed it for 1,000 years. It outlived the bombing, the propaganda, the men who ordered the destruction, and the men who carried it out. It is on the shelf today because of a thank you note an old abbot pressed into the hands of a German army itself. The note kept its promise even when nothing else did. The abbey was rebuilt where it stood as it has stood. It was reconsecrated in 1964, and a monk now lives there. And the rule of Benedict is still read on the mountain where he wrote it. The Poles who raised a flag had fought their way out of a Soviet prison and across the world to strike a blow for a free Poland. They did not get one. While they were dying on point 593, the leaders of the Allied powers were already settling at conferences they were not invited to that Eastern Poland would stay in the Soviet hands, and the rest would fall under a government answering to Moscow. The men of Monte Cassino had liberated Italy and could not go home. Most of them never did. Their general, Anders, was stripped of his citizenship by the New Poland and lived out the rest of his life in exile in London. When he died, he asked to be buried not in any capital, but on the mountains his men had taken. He now is there under the same poppies. The mountain had been emptied and broken before, and it always came back. The men who gave it back to the world the last time could not be given back the one thing they were fighting for. And it all hangs on a sheet of parchment in a dead language, signed by an old man in a black habit. A thank you note, written to the wrong army for saving the right thing. The library survived because of the men inside the army that history would come to fear, acting for reasons that were never entirely clean. Rescue in wartime rarely comes from the right people for the right reasons. It comes from whoever breaks step at the right moment. The mountain was destroyed by the side that held the ranks and the written orders. It was saved by a few men with some trucks and a day's head start, while the people who commanded the war were still arguing over a map. The men with the maps decide how a war is fought. Every so often, someone much further down the line decides what it leaves behind.